Most digital marketing agencies, they fail you and their clients, not because they are lazy. Usually it's because they are built to sell different packages separately instead of owning the whole outcome of your company. I saw this happening for 15 years from within agencies, startups, and even enterprise. And I was sitting in different seats throughout this time until I got to have my own agency and do it differently. So let me show you how I know this, because it took me over a decade to figure this out. So most of you may not know this, but I come from the biology background. I studied biology, I did my master's in science teaching, and back in 2009, I was moving from Brazil to the UK, and I had to find a job. When I was studying biology, I did an internship in the IT department, and that's when I've learned a lot about technology, about coding and websites. So when I got to London, I had a choice to do it. Either pursue the biology vertical that I was already learning, already super specialized, or I could go towards one of my passions that was like teaching and doing games in using Flash to teach some concepts of biology. So I chose the second one. It was a tough transition. And in 2010, I was interviewing for several companies to start working in that industry, and one of them gave me a chance. It was a web agency that needed someone that knew how to handle Flash websites, animations, and coding. That agency was called Energy House Digital. With that, I got to work for a digital marketing agency inside London, UK, in a different area that, although I had some technical skills in there, I had no clue about marketing. All I knew was to build websites. And that taught me a lot, because I started to work close to designers, even clients. So that started to give me a real perspective of applying the technical skills for an end client. So this was the very first step that I had in there. So moving to the UK and then joining an agency. So I didn't come from a marketing background. I was coming from an outsider's perspective. Once I landed the job at EHD, it was great. I started to interact with the rest of the team available in there. We actually migrated inside another bigger agency that they had designers, they have account managers, they had developers, and interacting with the team was great for me to start putting some bits together. But as we started to grow within that agency, as EHD, an agency on its own, we started to hire new people. And the very first specialist that we hired nearly destroyed everything that we were putting together. These very first specialists that we were hiring after me, I was hired to do the web development, but then we wanted to grow in the SEO. And then a specialist was hired. And as the new specialist joined the team, I started to have some conversations with this person. Some of the tactics that he was proposing to my bosses at that time, I knew they weren't really good. Back when I was in Brazil, I was already studying a bit of SEO as I was developing some of my technical skills. And I noticed that he was proposing some black SEO strategies, but my bosses, they didn't know much about that. So it was more like me trying to show the guy and my bosses that those strategies wouldn't work out. I went outside of my job role and I started to study a bit more. And I interacted with that professional every single day. He used to sit by my side, so I was always asking him some of the questions. And I remember to a point that we were going to implement a strategy in our own website that I knew for sure it was a bad decision. It was a really bad decision. The same strategy was going to be proposed to our clients in the following week. And I remember having a really tough conversation with that specialist and my bosses saying, this is not really good. We're going to be penalized at some point by Google. And I remember the specialist looking at me and saying, mate, do you know how many businesses are, 3,000 visits in the website? It was something that I have to control myself because it was his specialty. I was, stepping on his toes, and I understand why he was being defensive at that time. But for me, I was thinking from the company's perspective, from EHT perspective, and not addressing that, it was a really, really bad move. And I recall getting out of the meeting a bit upset, but I kid you not, a couple of days later, Google released the Panda algorithm. For those who understand this, like, they destroyed a lot of link farming websites. They just disappeared from Google from one day to the other. And it was like basically the whole strategy of the guy was to creating more links in these link farms websites. Literally every single one of the ones that he was suggesting we should go after with a lot of like keyword repetition got chopped off from Google from one day to the other one. When that news came, I went into my bosses because the guy wouldn't hear me. And then I said, look, it happened. And I'm glad it happened before we started to implement this for us and for our clients, because we would literally disappear from Google from one day to the other one. So here is the second step that I had to go through in this timeline. This SEO nightmare that taught me how, even with a specialist, things can go wrong. It was really uncomfortable for me because I had to step on an area that wasn't my specialty, but I had to study a lot to catch up. And because I flagged that this could happen, and then Google released that algorithm change that chopped off the whole strategy of the guy, he ended up losing his job. It wasn't comfortable. It's still uncomfortable for me to talk about this, but this is something that happens behind closed doors, and I am actually opening this to the public because I like to be as transparent as possible, and I'm doing that even for my own clients' sake right now. So that was the very first time that I understood that calling yourself a specialist doesn't actually make you one. And the end client has no clue what's going on until the damage is done. Luckily, I stepped up and then I tackled a problem that would affect not only EHD, but our clients as well. That was really a bad hire problem, and we've managed to tackle. But I kept seeing other gaps throughout my experience within EHD. I had to perform other roles that weren't necessarily the just straight web developer role. I ended up learning a lot about design. So my communication with the designers became so good that at some point the designers from other agencies that we worked through partnerships, they started to request me to build their newsletters, their websites, because I was the only one that could communicate pretty well with them and build things almost to a pixel perfect point. That's how we used to call it back in the day. But I had to go there and learn from it. So I wasn't just learning about web development and SEO, I was learning about design as well and user experience. At some point, we needed to develop the whole conversion optimization department, and we didn't have a specialist in-house. So I took on into reading a couple of books, and then I was responsible to start teaching the team through lunch and learns how to handle that. And that opened up like a different kind of department that I could connect inside my brain, how I could connect the whole web development with UX, with the design, and with the SEO in terms of content creation as well. So this is kind of how I started to connect different dots that weren't part of just my knowledge of biology, science, and then I started to have a broader knowledge of marketing in itself. And as I was working with different departments, my bosses realized that my communication skills were growing, and they started to bring me to partner calls and with client calls. And that's when I started to have contact with other project managers from different companies, enterprise and some other agencies, and I started to see some of the gaps as well. And I could see when I sat in these meetings where other agencies were doing, I could see a bit of fluff. And what I mean is that I remember a big meeting that we had with a big SEO company in there. We were just doing the web development for that client. And they were selling like this SEO report, amazing. And I knew for a fact that that was just one click report that was generated by a tool that we could do it on the web developer tools in the browser. And I knew that I knew how much they were spending in that agency, and they would copy and paste that, put it in a spreadsheet, and send it to us. Literally, copy and paste. It was exactly the same report that I could do it myself. That's kind of like where I felt that some agencies weren't being as honest as possible, or they just didn't know better. They didn't know how to handle these reports pretty well. They would just copy and paste because they weren't technical to solve the SEO technical parts. And with that, I started to work more towards project management. And I talked to my bosses. That was the very first time that I had to literally shift from web development into project management. And then I was the in-betweener, the account management, the clients, and the technical team, being all of the developers, designers, content creators in terms of SEO. I started to handle and do that interface and plan things because I had to read some books about agile methodology as well, because the agency HD was running on a waterfall model, which was like every single thing we had to do everything and then go for client approval, and then if there was pushback, sometimes we had to undo work for weeks before even starting the development. So as I studied a bit more the part of project management and agile methodology, we started to move things a bit faster as well, which felt for me really great because we were being more optimized, more focused, and we didn't have to wait for long iterations before course correcting. So this was something that I implemented within HD, and it felt way better for the team to handle this new approach. But the more I worked within HD, I knew that we were selling some services for specific clients. So we had clients that would only do web development. Some of them would just do design. Some of them would do design and web development. Some would do only SEO, content creation. And internally, I could see that we could do so much more if we had more time to invest in those clients. But because they weren't paying for different packages, I wasn't allowed to touch that. And that started to bother me a bit, up to a point that I personally felt the need of looking for different opportunities because I wanted to work and help one company only in all the realms of digital marketing that I had access to and knowledge about. Because I could see that some of the clients, they could have a bit more help in other areas and the outcomes would be so much better because then we would have the full control of their marketing and we could push them forward pretty well. So that was something that I really wanted to accomplish, and I did for years until COVID hit and I decided to move to another country as well. And that's when I had the opportunity to work for a startup in the US. I was hired as a software engineer to work on the product. But because I was already connecting several dots in terms of the digital marketing and actually in product, I could talk about the web development, I could talk about performance, I could talk about SEO, I could talk about UX, I could talk about design, having the exposure to a bigger enterprise and having access to the CEO as well. I had the chance to talk to the CEO and share my ideas. When I joined this startup, it was a similar experience and I had direct access to the CEO, to the CTO, and to the COO. The CEO literally became my mentor. We would have like weekly calls at least. I shifted from, I initially was hired as a software engineer, and then they asked me to migrate to product management. And product management, it's way more than just project management, but involves a lot more knowledge in terms of UX. And you have to have access to the other departments, the marketing, not only the product team, but the marketing, the sales teams. User experience became the main focus in there, and deciding which solutions, which features we would have to either improve or ship new ones based on the feedback that we're getting from our users. I saw a new CMO being hired and bringing an agency that he trusted, but the agency from distance, I never interacted with them, but I could see they were a bit full of fluff, big bill, and not a lot of delivery. But again, it wasn't my responsibility. I could see the problems from the distance or from the sides. The website had a different brand than the product itself. They kind of looked somewhat, if you forced your eyes, you would feel like they were the same brand. but it was really not good. And there wasn't much of like, apart from just creating content, there wasn't really a way to build an inbound strategy for that product. Yet again, I saw another company spending a lot of money in an agency that I didn't feel like they were owning the outcomes. They were just doing a package, and the package was just create some content. So that bothered me a bit. I worked with them for a couple of years, and then I had the opportunity as well to join another startup. And once I joined the other startup, it was like from basically from zero. This was one of the official ones. I had experiences with other startups that failed even before making any money or getting any investor. But this one that I joined afterwards, then I was wearing multiple hats. I was a software engineer. I had to do a bit of product management, project management. We would help with the sales. We would help with even recruiting, up to a point that we were acquired by a bigger company in Canada as the main investor. So we created the software from zero to a point that we got this new investor. And that's when our startup became part of a bigger enterprise. I could see still some holes in there because they didn't have every specialist in the main areas. So they had someone that was more of the brand, design, creative director, I dare say. But then the SEO people, the people that were creating the content, they weren't really SEO specialists. And I could see that a lot of work could be done and improving there. The social media side as well didn't have like a strong strategy. I ended up going back to EHD and discussing with their previous the owners, right? EHD had shifted the brand after they merged with two other agencies. The oldest brand was called Digivate. And when I talked to them, I could see that there was an opportunity for me to work with them in a coaching relationship. And as the owners were a bit burnt out because the life at an agency it's hard. It's constant shifts here and there. Then there was an opportunity for me to make the acquisition of the whole agency, Digivate. I took the challenge and I've worked with them up to the point that then it became my agency. The thing that I took from all these transitions from one company to the other was that I could still see the silos. So this is what I call the silos step in here in the timeline. The silos. So that's when it landed to me that it was different companies, different industries, different countries, but still the silos existed, and it was exactly the same problem. The marketing was disconnected with the business goals, and the marketing goals weren't really aligned. And when agencies were being used, they would also sell mini packages that would solve partially the problems, but yet again just create yet another silo that couldn't be reconnected with the whole strategy of the marketing aligned with the company's goals. And then it comes down to the point where I had my own agency. Luckily, it was the agency where I basically was born into marketing, and I had full control of the direction that I was taking. So when I took over Digivate, I could see that there were some of these silos happening even within the agency. So we had some teams that were doing web development, design, branding, and SEO. But then there was one side of the company which was more in terms of the social media and paid campaigns, the PPC department, as we call it. They didn't know, even though they were working on the same client, they didn't really know what the other teams were doing. And this was one of the first things that I tackled, and I kind of flattened the whole company in terms of taking off the specialists from what we call from the dungeons and exposing them directly with content with the clients. And I started to do training daily with the whole team for an hour and a half to show them what kind of questions we should be asking the clients or prospects about their businesses, because they knew pretty well how to solve some problems in their lanes. But when I asked it, like, okay, like how much this company needs to grow, I don't know. And like, how many sales do they have to do to accomplish some of the objectives? They didn't know. How is this campaign here being considered by the development team and how they're going to apply? I don't know. The silos that I could see previously on the other companies and their marketing, I could see even internally. That training was pretty great because then every single specialist leveled up their knowledge on the other specialists' areas. So everyone became fluent in at least using the same language and understanding that those strategies that they were coming up with, they would only make sense if we knew the objectives and the goals of the companies, the clients that we were serving, not only being following whatever the client asked us to do. The consequence of this was that the whole team, Digivate used to have like a sales team that would sell the specific solutions packages. But again, because they were not specialists, they would sometimes even promise some stuff that we didn't do it, right? This before I joined. And for me, that was not a good place to be. So one of the things that I shut down immediately was this sales team. Shutting down the sales team meant that the team would have to perform the task. That was the idea that I wanted to bring into Digivate. Not selling packages, but selling a team that attaches, that embeds inside your company. And if we have this alignment with the leader of the company or the leaders of the company, that they know which are the goals that the company needs to get to, this is where we wanted to be. Based on this experience, as I took over Digivate, I started to migrate to what I call this new model, where we become part of your company as the digital marketing arm. So you don't have to handle different agencies. You don't have to become the project manager among different agencies doing siloed things, or if you don't have the internal team to do it, you may have like one specialist. We will cover all the other areas where you don't do it. So this is what I call then the new model. So the new model has everything to do with not selling hours, not selling separate packages, but selling the whole solution in terms of an internal partnership, as you would be hiring an internal team for a predictable amount of money that every month you know it. Just like you would know how much you have to pay for an employee or a couple of employees to run that team, we can do the same thing in a part-time where we have senior specialists performing all of these different initiatives in different specialties. So you don't have to hire internally, up to a point that we can grow your company to a point where it makes sense for you to start hiring. And that's when we are going to make the transition. So literally for most of the companies, it's almost like an amateur marketing. And then we set up the rules to a point where the company grows so much that it makes sense to start hiring internally. And then we're going to prepare the new hires to keep the same quality or even go further than what we can do, because then they would be full-timers inside of your company. So I come from these conclusions based on my own experience, coming from outside of the marketing realm with an outsider's point of view. I realized a specialist that wasn't really a specialist could make a lot of damage within a company or for several clients inside the agency perspective. I could see these silos in different agencies, in different companies. From my experience working in different industries and different teams, I could see that having like an A team that really knew how to work together, and they were specialists in their own lanes, but they had the clarity and the capability of talking to each other and define a single strategy that is aligned to the business goals. That then became the main solution. And if you want to know how it is to work with us, you need to find out if you are a good fit. So go into the link down into the description, and then we can take it from there.